Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. Alhamdulillah, this is now episode 66 of the podcast The Forum. Myself, Brother Mahdi Locke, author of The Big Step, and today we are doing a book review, so al-Hajj Abu Ja'far al-Hanbali will be interviewing me.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillahi wa kafa, wassalatu wassalamu ala man la nabiyya ba'da wa ba'd. So alhamdulillah, we're going to be looking at the book, The Great Event Has Occurred, Usury Has Become Permissible. And this is by the late Marja Imam Muhammad at-Taaweel, who died 1436. He was a professor of law and jurisprudence in Marja, Morocco. This was translated by the brother al-Hajj, because he's also made Hajj, Mahdi La. In the sort of introduction to this, why a book about usuries become permissible? I thought this was already sorted out. I thought this was already resolved. I mean, we've got the Sharia compliant mortgages. We've got the discussion. Some of the spokesmen for Islam have said that it's a necessity to have a house, and that's the only way that good and wholesome families can be reared. I thought this thing was sorted out. Why are we having this book now?
Alright. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. This issue of usury, using banks, bank accounts, bank interest, mortgages. These are all issues that the Imam discusses. This is something that several Murajia have discussed, and that's why what I've done in this book is I not only have I translated Imam at-Taaweel's words, rahimahullah, where he goes into all the issues and refutes all the arguments that the proponents of what you might call Sharia compliant banking or just flat out standard banking,
Yes.
Standard mortgages. But I've also added as appendices the writings of Imam Muhammad al-Bulti and Imam Muhammad Zuhaili.
Right.
For example, discussing Durur and Hajj. There's also a fatwa by Imam al-Bulti where he refutes the quote-unquote European Fatwa Council. I say quote-unquote because Imam al-Bulti himself was asked, I think this goes back to 2007, when he was in Holland. I believe he was in Holland, and someone stood up and asked him about this European Fatwa Council, or the European Council, I think it's called the European Council for Fatwa and Research.
Right.
And this individual, this Muslim brother, asked him and said, I think they're doing, beneficial work and so on and so forth. And Imam al-Bulti said, if we're going to call something a Fatwa Council or a Fiqhi Council, what that means is everyone on that panel has to be a Faqih or a Mufti.
Right.
And that is simply not the case with this organization. There are people on there who are merely Quran teachers, they're merely Arabic teachers, maybe so-and-so is an engineer, so-and-so is an accountant.
Okay.
They may be well-read in certain affairs, but they're not on that level.
Well, just as a short interlude, Sheikh Muhammad al-Barazi, who they'd asked to be on the council, he's a teacher that I had, he actually left in the very early days of the federal council. He said, and he's packing his box, and he was asked, well, why are you leaving? He said, because truth and falsehood cannot occupy the same space. And what he meant by that is there's things that are going on that are not tenable. So he walked out. He left because in the early days they were sort of trying to collect different people that would represent the Fatwa Council and what their objectives were, and he left early on.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. So the European Fatwa Council does have a big part to play in this problem, this dilemma, and that's why Imam al-Bulti in his fatwa, he shows that what they did, the European Fatwa Council, when they said that it was permissible to buy to get mortgages in Europe because Europe is Dar al-Harab, and then they twisted something from the Hanafi madhab and so on and so forth. And he said this is just completely wrong. This is not what Imam Abu Hanifa meant. Imam Abu Hanifa was talking about a wartime situation. If you are in a wartime situation, why would you be thinking about buying real estate?
Yeah.
And so on and so forth. And then going into the fact that the fact that you're actually living in Europe, and the fact that you are allowed to settle there, you're allowed to have your masajid, you're not in Dar al-Harab. That's
Right.
why I even threw in another fatwa in there by Imam Bulti explaining why Europe is not Dar al-Harab.
Sure.
So all these arguments are incredibly flimsy, and they're not based on any sort of solid ground whatsoever. And however, I guess you're asking me about Imam Muhammad al-Taaweel's work. This is the first time we actually have a book where someone's actually, where a modern judge actually stepped in and written a book on the topic.
Sure.
and dealt with everything in detail, and said, and then tried to look at all the arguments that people put forward to justify getting mortgages from standardized banks. Because he doesn't even go into Islamic banks a lot. He goes to a lot of what people do with standard banks in the West.
Is the distinction between the riba and the banks, is that distinction laid out in the book, or is he solely just looking at the transactions that are coming from these banks? Like, does he make a distinction of, fiat currency and banks versus the mortgages banks, or is the thrust of this book just solely dealing with taking out the mortgages from the banks?
Yeah, well, he's looking at banks and just bank interest, not just mortgages,
Right.
but just dealing in banks. Like, for example, if you have money in your account and you're accruing interest on the money and so on and so forth.
Okay.
Right. Fiat currencies, that's a separate issue.
Sure.
That's a separate issue
It's
because
related, but it's not.
it's
the
related,
thrust of
right? Because that would require like a research into what's called a fractional reserve banking and these kind of issues. No, what we're looking at here is banking, using a bank, having is the interest that we have in that we have in modern banks nowadays. Is it the same interest that the Prophet ﷺ was talking about in his time, that Allah talks about in the Quran, and so on and so forth, and the arguments that people try to bring forward to allow it? Because this is what he goes over. There's like 12 points. He says they're going to say this. They're going to say, the interest that we have nowadays, there's no clear text against it in the Quran. There's no clear text against it in the Sunnah. There's no ijma.
What are we to do? We have to function in this day and age. We have to.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. All that kind of stuff.
What are we going to do? Now, you mentioned rulings from different maraji' on this matter. What made you settle upon this particular book by Imam Muhammad at-Taaweel? You could have used just Buti's fatwa and Imam Buti's fatwa suffice with that, or maybe another ruling. What made you decide to settle upon this particular book and not the others?
Okay, well, first of all, as far as I know, this is the only, like I said, this is the only book I know on the topic, right? So I know that Imam Buti and Imam Muhammad, for example, they've written fatwa on this,
Right?
Which may be run to several pages and so forth. But this is the first time I've actually seen a proper book. And there's also the personal reason is the fact that obviously Imam Muhammad at-Taaweel, one of his students, is my teacher.
Okay.
Right? Who I studied with in Morocco, Saad Ali Filadi, who did the foreword for this book. And he also played a part in getting the permission for the book to be translated. Because when I lived in Morocco, now we're going back between 8 and 12 years ago now. I mean, now as I remember the story, the way it worked out was someone from the UK was bringing a group of Muslims over to Morocco to do some visits, and they said, we want to meet. We'd like to meet some other man, sit down with some other man. So I thought, well, the obvious choice would be Imam Muhammad at-Taaweel,
Sure.
right? Because he was the Marja of the Moroccans and the Malikis.
Yeah. And those people that were coming over, did they understand sort of the rank of scholars and Maraji? Did they have knowledge of this, or was this sort of touching on new ground for them?
I think it was touching on new ground for them, because I think what they were more expecting, and Allah knows best, I think what they were more expecting was something along the lines of maybe meeting some sort of Sufi sheikh or something like that.
So they had sort of a romanticized view of like Morocco and the Muslim world. It's kind of fetishized.
Yeah, maybe that's what it was. But whereas I wanted to really show them someone. No, this guy actually is an authority. This is someone who is, a master. This is someone who you're going to sit with, you're going to respect, and you're going to learn something from him, and you get to see how he is. So
that's substantive knowledge.
Yeah. So and what happened was, when I mentioned this, because I was studying with the Ustad Ali Filadi, like we had regular weekly lessons because we were doing fiqh, we were doing usul, we did creed. So we arranged to meet, and we went to the Imam's house, because he had a house in the new city, rahimahullah. And as we were walking up, I was making sure I fully understood what was happening. Like who was this Imam? Who was his? And I knew about him. I knew about him because in the classes we did when I was with Ustad Filani, because we did Fara'id in depth. We did the Qarawiyyin High School Usul Fiqh program. We actually read Imam Buti's Creed book together.
Okay.
We read a lot of stuff together, and Ustad Filadi, he would talk to me about stuff, about subjects he'd covered, and he'd say, "Oh yeah, I remember going over this point with Sheikh at-Taaweel back in, في السبعينيات, back in the 1970s and so forth." So you can tell that they go way back.
Yeah.
All right, they go way back.
Long history.
So when we walked up to his house, I actually said to him, I said basically, Imam Muhammad at-Taaweel to you Moroccans and you Malikis in general, he's like Imam al-Bulti to us Shafis. And he's like, yeah.
Right.
That's the regard we.
Holds the senior position. Among
Yeah,
them,
yeah,
of high regard and high rank.
yeah. That's how we regard him. So we arrived at the house, and we knocked on, and then I remember this day. Yeah, so there was a maid for the house. An older lady was a maid, and she came out and she said, "Who is it?" And my teacher, he said, "It's Adi Filali," here. And we waited for a few minutes. And now Imam Muhammad at-Taaweel, this time he must have been 80 something,
Right.
because
Okay.
he passed away about 4 years ago.
Okay, so he's in the twilight of his
Yeah. He's not very mobile and so forth. But we waited a few minutes. He came out like from a side door. It was a pretty big house. He came out from a side door, and he had like a beaming smile on his face, like just a really beaming smile. And he's like, Adi Filali. And he comes, and then he starts like coming forward. He's not walking very fast. Ustad Filali sees him. His face lights up. He opens the gate, because there's a gate to the garden. He opens up. He runs over to him, just embraces him. Just kissing on the forehead, just showing him so much love and respect.
Wow.
And I was just sat there watching this, like, subhanAllah. Yeah, now it all comes together.
Yeah.
Because you've been talking about this guy so much in our class, so you've been making some references to him and so forth. And I know this goes back like 40 years.
You can see the relationship between these men.
Yeah, so they're very, very close. And he said, come on in. So we went in, and we had some tea and some stuff. And Ustad Filali explained what was happening. There's a group of believers from England. They want to come see you and so forth. And so he's like, "Oh, that's fine," and everything worked out. And then, the sheikh, like, just, he spoke to me for a few minutes, just asked me, the usual pleasantries, right? And then he gave me some books on the way out.
Okay.
Right, which was one of them was this book. He gave me this book. I think he gave me the Al-Qarawiyyin fil Fiqh, which is also on its way. I think he gave me the one about al-Basma Warathiya, like DNA. So that was my first time getting some copies, and I think I might have passed some of them on to you at the time. And that was basically the meeting, and then because I think this was just before the summertime. This was like in the spring, and then so what happened was when the summertime came around, I went back to England for the summer. Those believers from the UK, they came, and then they met. Ustad Filali met up with them, brought them to see Sheikh at-Taaweel. So I wasn't in the country when it happened.
Okay.
And alhamdulillah, that was the meeting. Now, and someone else who comes into the picture now is Brother Muhammad.
Okay.
Brother Muhammad
Yeah,
Reeves,
Brother Muhammad.
right? So he comes into the picture because he was also in Morocco at the time. Like, he was coming in and out of Morocco because he had some family in Morocco. So he would come over and visit, and we'd spend time together. That's when we got to know each other really well. And this is why this is kind of a joint project between us.
Now, had you heard of the book in Arabic? Because when was the book first? When did it come out in Arabic?
I think it came out like maybe 20, 25 years ago.
Okay, all right. So had the book made waves then? Was still making waves now, or had it sort of subsided?
I think it was just there. I don't know how much of its impact it made.
Sure.
But I mean, obviously was written by Maraja.
Yeah.
But I don't think people outside of Morocco had heard of it,
Okay.
right? Because again, this is one of the things that he makes clear in his foreword, is he says, because he studied the Qarawiyyin for a long time, and he said, what I know about the fuqaha of the Qarawiyyin is that it's all there in their memory, right? So when they teach just from memory,
Sure.
right? It's all there, and I've sat in some class in the Qarawiyyin. Right, I'm not making any claims. I'm not a graduate. I've sat in classes in the Qarawiyyin. For example, I sat in some classes with like 2 or 3 lessons with Sheikh al-Marawi, who's the big grammarian in the Qarawiyyin, and he would be teaching like with the Sharb and Aqil. He would teach that just off the top of his dome. I mean, just there's no book. He's just holding a pillow, literally holding a pillow. Students are reading to him. He's correcting them. Like, no, that's a typo. No, that's wrong. And it's all there. So what Ustad Filali, what he makes clear in his foreword is he says that these fuqaha of the Qarawiyyin, they would only write, like, they're just pulsing out of memory and just write something down for you, right? They might write down a fatwa, they might write down a little opinion on something, but it's not part of their nature to write like big extensive books on topics.
Yeah, like them, the Mauritanians.
Yeah.
Similar vein of
Yeah, and that's why, for example, like if you're going to look at, say, the Qarawiyyin scholars, you compare them to, say, like Imam Muhammad Zuhaydi or Imam Muhammad al-Bulti or the Egyptians like Imam Sha'rawi or any of these big Maraji over there. They're writing copious stuff, Whereas the Moroccans are more just they're teaching. See more of that. But Ustad at-Taaweel, Sheikh Ta'weel, he's more of an exception to this. That's what Ustad Filali says. Whereas he actually did take the time out to write longer books. Because this book is quite short compared to other stuff. There's al-Fiqh is a bit longer. He's got another one on Khasas and Madhab al-Maliki.
Right.
The special characteristics of the Maliki Madhab, which is a bit longer. Then he's got another one on Mushkilat al-Faqr, the problem of poverty. Then he's got a really big, thick book, like probably 10 times the size of this book, on Sharikat, like how to run companies. So he was like, he stood out as a writer amongst the man, the Qarawiyyin, the Fuqaha of Morocco in general. So Brother Muhammad comes into the picture because
he's Maliki in his method.
He's Maliki.
Okay, so he wants to see more works published.
Yeah, he wants more,
a wider exposure of the school to Anglosphere Muslim audiences.
Yeah, and he's well traveled as well, Brother Muhammad, mashallah. Like he spent time in places like Senegal, places like Mali, places like Mauritania, places like Sudan, Egypt, and he was especially thinking about like West Africa. He's like, we don't have a lot of stuff from West Africa in English, and I think Anglosphere Muslims need to be exposed to this. They need to see more of this. Now he mentioned to me like years later, that we're talking maybe now 3 years ago, right? Maybe 2016, 2017. He brings this idea to my attention, and I'm thinking, okay. And then I was thinking about it. And then one day, I'm in Jeddah. I think I was praying like Salat al-Duha at home. And I finished my prayer and I look at my shelf, and then I just happened to notice Ustad Ta'weel's books.
Yeah.
Sheikh Ta'weel's books. There's like 3 of them there. I'm like, hey.
Yeah, there's a whole tradition. There's a whole tradition in front of you.
Yeah, and they're like, here they are. They're sat there right in front of me. They're not that long. It's not like it would take me like years to put out. We're not talking about the Hadlum or anything like that. We're just talking about nice like 100-page books, 50-page books. So then I got in touch with Ustad Ali Filadi, and he said, great idea. And then he went and he spoke to the Imam's family because he'd passed away this time.
So this now goes, his repository of knowledge and sort of his inheritance, for lack of a better word, now goes to his family. So they've sort of got rights over the publishing and control of his books. Exactly.
Yeah. So he goes and speaks to them, and then they handed over permission. They said, okay, that's fine. They gave me permission to translate 4 books. So this being the first of them, and then I've got al-Fiqh al-Fiqh, and then Mushkilat al-Faqr, the problem of poverty, and then the one on Khasas al-Madhab al-Maliki. Now, yes, to clear the record, people might get confused. I am a Shafi'i in fiqh. But alhamdulillah, I'm willing to help out these other madhab because I think in the Anglosphere they tend to be outnumbered or forgotten about. The same with the Hanbali method. I'm happy to partake in supporting, especially the Hanbalis and the Malikis, to put stuff out there.
Okay, so in looking at this work, you've translated this book. In the run-up to this, did you have any idea how it would be received or what people would be thinking? What was the point of releasing this book? Was it to make a wave? Was it to get people to leave something alone? Because in looking at the landscape right now in the Anglosphere, the rank and file among the wealthier of the Muslims has made their own consensus that we're taking out mortgages and it's got to get done because we have to raise a family and so on and so forth. So what was the motivation in putting this book together? Was it to try to stop those people, or is it try to act as a warning, or what was sort of the motivation in putting it out?
Well, I think to show, I think one of the, how would I put this? I think the underlying motive is, and I think again this is something that you and I have been talking about for years. And it's also part of, for example, what you've done with your translations, what you've done with the Mirath website, what I've tried to do with my YouTube channel, especially with not so much the podcast, but I say also with the video translations, is to get this point across that there is a clerical class in charge of this ummah.
Yes.
That's the deeper issue here. And the fact is that the Anglosphere Islam and Anglosphere Muslims are detached from that clerical class.
They're living a Protestant lifestyle.
Yeah.
For lack of a better word, they're living a Protestant, almost Lutheran lifestyle in which there's sort of this mystical idea of getting to right and wrong is either through the Holy Spirit or your own personal convictions or what have you. They're living this sort of mystical idea, which is Protestant informed, which makes sense because if you look at the people that came into the countries of some of these people, they were Protestants.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Anglican Church through England and Lutheran missions from the United States or other areas. So they're living a Protestant lifestyle.
Yeah, so they're completely detached, and yeah, so Protestant lifestyle means it's. So I remember I actually went to a Catholic school and I was living in Denmark, and they used to split us up into Catholics and non-Catholics for RE classes, religious education classes, and then you have a Catholic guy explaining to you what Protestantism, what the Protestant belief is, or what the principle is. That he would say that all you need is you and the Bible.
That's it.
It's you and the Bible. So there's no authority, there's no hierarchy, there's nothing.
Holy Spirit decides.
Yeah.
That's your snack pack. You're carrying them with you.
Yeah.
Whenever you're reading, you pull them out, say, what does this mean?
Yeah.
And then you decide. Only issue is the Baptists also have the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
The Lutherans have the Holy Spirit. The Foursquare Gospel has the Holy Spirit. The African Methodist Church has the Holy Spirit. And it's a very contentious Holy Spirit because it's created all these denominations.
Yeah. This Holy Spirit is not really on one method.
Yeah. So, okay. So the impetus behind doing that was to try to reconnect the Muslims out here who, for lack of a better word, are in a type of exile, self-imposed exile, to the Maraji' and what they represent and the rulings in the book. Now, you mentioned the book is broken up into a number of justifications.
Yeah.
Now, when I read through this book, because I took my time reading through it, it was really it was a pithy but a very gentle read. It wasn't really taxing on the mind where you had to have extensive technical knowledge. And I think that was done on purpose.
Yeah.
Because the people he's addressing,
Yeah.
You don't want to go too technical with them because they're just too narrow.
Yeah.
Now, the first justification he mentioned is that bank transactions are a modern form of transaction that was completely unknown to previous fuqaha. Why is that important?
Okay, so because this is the issue of, again, this is one thing I alluded to earlier, whereas people try to say that we live in a modern age, right? And therefore, scholars are bewildered by this. We live in a modern age, and these institutions that we have, and these transactions that we have, they were just unknown, right? They weren't there in the time of the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They weren't there in the time of the companions of the first generations, or in the times.
New madhab, new religion.
Exactly. So we're dealing with a completely new situation. We don't have the tools. It's not there. We don't have the, not to say the tools. We don't have the nusus. We don't have the text that say either way whether it's halal or haram. Therefore, we have to make do with it. And then they're going to fall back onto stuff like benefit versus harm. And clearly, there's benefit in this because we're securing land for ourselves.
That's it, because you're making benefit. You say, well, okay, benefit versus harm, but then you're using the fleshly matters to define what's nefa and what's dharr.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, because I feel good about it, because I decide it's good, therefore that means it's good.
Yeah.
So you got this sort of salad bowl Islam. You're reaching in, pulling out lettuce, reaching in, pulling out your garlic, you're reaching in.
Yeah.
And that's it. And that's how it's working. Okay. All right. Now, the second justification is they say there is no clear text in the Book of Allah or the Sunnah of His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that declares this transaction unlawful. Now, this one I don't hear very often, but I know that it's out there.
Yeah. What
on earth makes people think this?
I'm as stumped as you.
It's like I'm looking at this like, what on earth would make someone come to that type of justification? And I think part of this goes to the fact that you'll get a certain quality of Muslims that may have never read the Quran cover to cover.
Yeah.
But they're dead set. There's nothing in there that prohibits riba. Which is strange because riba, that was the last sin forbidden in the Quran.
Yeah.
Not only that, but the Prophet ﷺ, he went down to Ta'if. These people were still trading in riba. He surrounded them for 15 days, shelled them. These are people praying, fasting. They're going on Hajj every year. And he killed these people. He fought them. Because he said, you have to leave this alone. Take announcement of war from Allah and His Messenger. From Allah.
Yeah.
He still didn't do it. So this seems really weird, this second justification. I think it's more in the air than on the tongues of people. It's sort of a mindset, if you will. The third justification, they say bank transactions are not lending and what the bank receives from its customers by way of money cannot be called a loan, such that it would fall under the prohibition against lending with a surplus. Now, what does the Imam flesh out in terms of, from what you translated, how does he sort of knock that peg down?
Yeah, from what I remember, and this is something that I noticed this just living out here in the UK, seeing how the banks do it, because obviously, if you're putting your money in the bank, the bank is then going to use that money for other transactions. It's going to take the money and invest it in other things, right? So the bank is borrowing that money from you.
Yeah.
When you're depositing your money in the bank is borrowing that money from you, and then they're going to put that towards. They're going to lend it out again to other people for their mortgages and their car loans and whatever it is, their overdrafts and all these kinds of things. And we also know that at the same time that if you, what the bank fears, what any bank fears, is a bank run.
Yes.
Right? We know
everyone comes in and says, "I want to withdraw my money."
Yeah, and if that happens, the whole thing collapses.
Yeah.
So it's very clear what's going on, and like, why are they giving you money? That's the thing. Why are they giving you money? Why are you accruing interest? Like, what is that? Is that what a service fee? No.
Yeah.
The more money you have in the account, the longer it stays there, the more money you get.
Yeah. If you could sort of speak to the listeners on this nouveau use of Arabic terminology to justify things. Because a lot of what's happened is they've said, okay, well, this transaction represents this and that and this and that and bingo, bingo, bingo. Now we have a halal transaction. And they'll say, okay, here it is. It's mudaraba, or it's munabada, or it's musharaka. And then all of a sudden, hocus pocus dominocus, it becomes this halal transaction.
Yeah.
But I've found when I've spoken to branch managers, bankers, and you ask them practically, what is the difference in terms of form and function between these Sharia compliant loans and the banking transactions that we know to be riba in most instances? What is the difference? And they've all said, whenever I've met them, there is no difference other than the terminology.
Yeah. And
What have you found?
And they might be charging you more.
Yeah, what have you found?
Well, it's the same thing. I mean, I remember you told me way back in the day. This is when I was living in Nottingham. You told me way back in the day. You said the biggest litmus test is ask an unbeliever.
Yeah.
So I remember. I think I took the HSBC model, HSBC Sharia compliant. It's just the word Sharia compliant. It's like, why are you saying halal?
Yeah.
Why are you saying Sharia compliant?
Yeah.
You're not going to have the guts to say halal. You're going to say Sharia compliant. Make up this term.
Yeah.
What is this? Muwafiq with Sharia? I mean, it's just silly.
Why is this being done?
So what I did is I spoke to, because I have lawyers in my family. My grandfather's a lawyer. He's passed away. I have another lawyer uncle in London, and there's another lawyer in Hungary who's a corporate lawyer. I think I spoke to him as well. I think I did. I spoke to at least my grandfather and one of my uncles, right? Yeah. So these are all legal people.
So you said to them, "Hey, are you guys handing out transactions which you're operating at a loss for the purpose of assisting?"
What I did is I basically described to them. I said, "Listen, what I'm going to do is I'm going to describe the HSBC Sharia compliant mortgage. I want you to tell me, just listen carefully and tell me, is this interest or not?"
Okay.
And that's what I did. I said, "Listen, this is what they do. The blah 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 blah." Then they make you, you put the down payment on the house. Then you're paying it off every month. Then you're paying rent on top of that, right? Right? And they're all like, "No, that's interest." Yeah. That was the answer every single time. No, that is interest.
Yeah, that's the normal loans that we do. There's nothing altruistic in there. You're not.
Yeah.
Because what you're asking is, in a word, is, okay, are you guys giving out, in order to help Muslims with their need to buy property and houses, are you actually operating a mortgage fund at a loss every year? Which means, are you actually running your bank counter to how a bank normally runs, with the express desire to assist Muslims?
No, this is the naivete of Muslims. This out here in the Anglosphere, it's just stunning. It's like, do you really think that the board at HSBC or Barclays or wherever, that they actually sat down one day and said, those poor Muslims, they're trying so hard to obey Allah and to please him and to not anger him, we need to help.
That's it.
We need to make something that doesn't displease Allah. We need to help them. Let's pour them.
When in reality, what most likely happened is someone from the technocratic class of English-speaking Muslims sort of presented an angle to these board members that was workable, and they said, well, then that's what we're going to do. Because they don't, someone who's an unbeliever doesn't know Mashari kind of, they don't know that. They just know, okay, Sharia compliant because that's what such and such said.
Yeah, because it's a buzzword. All you're doing is what these banks are doing is they're saying, listen, we sell financial products. That's what they call it. We sell financial products. Our financial product, the mortgage, is not appealing to this market. This target audience of people is not appealing to them. They're not buying.
And we're looking to target that demographic.
Yeah,
How do we go about doing
so
that?
we have to rebrand and repackage our product and present it to them. And that's exactly what they did.
Okay.
You shift the labels around, like you were saying. You do the hocus pocus out of malocious. You call it musharaka, mudaraba. You throw in dorora, right? And people fall for. Ooh, it sounds really intellectual now, right? And I even found stuff online. I think it was a Muslim brother in the U.S. did some research into this, and he actually found, he interviewed some bank managers or someone high up at one of these banks who said, yeah, that's what we do. We draw up our financial product, this mortgage, whatever it is, and we just shop around for a fatwa. Yeah. We'll just shop around. We'll find some mufti. We'll give him some good money.
That's it.
And say, listen, just sign this.
And then we dazzle them with science.
Yeah.
That's what we do. We're just going to dazzle you. Okay, so they're putting on the razzle dazzle.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got the fourth justification. Some of them say that a bank transaction is a sleeping partnership, mudaraba, and some type of investment, and that the holders of the wealth deposit their money in the bank with the intention of investing it, and they have a fixed share of the profit.
Yeah.
Now, could you explain sort of what exactly the claimants of this position, what are they trying to establish?
Yeah, what they're trying to do here is they're trying to make it look like a bank, like when you're putting money in the bank, that all you're doing is basically doing what's called mudaraba. I think the other word is qirad. Yeah. That sort of bank transaction where you have someone's an investor and someone's a worker, yes. and that sort of setup. They're trying to make it look like that. Right. So what Imam Muhammad does in the chapter, he says, no, it's not like that at all. Like a qirad is set up with this purpose, with this intention, with this function. A banking transaction works like this because you have a fixed, like for example, the qirad, you're going to have like a fixed share, for example. Yes. Like I'm putting up this much money, you're my worker, you're going to make 10% or whatever it is. You're going to do it in this way. Whereas banking transaction, you don't know what's going to happen. You're putting money in the bank account, you're putting money in the account. You don't know.
Being made for inflation. There's all those things happening.
Right.
Sometimes they alter their interest rates as well.
Yeah.
They have yearly alterations and things like this. So it seems to be what you're saying, that when they're making these justifications, they're taking these words from the Arabic, from the books of fiqh, but they're divesting them of their meanings.
Yeah.
And then they're pouring them into this new sort of milieu without even consulting the scholars or consulting the original books from where they came. Yeah. Which is, I think, the similar thing that was done with fiqh of minorities, only this time, now they're doing transactions.
Yeah, and that's what I would say, that this stuff is related to fiqh of minorities, kind of branches out from it. But again, on page 47, that's the point he says. This is a form of gharar, right? And this is because it is possible that there will be no profit or no profit apart from the amount that was stipulated for the money's owner. In the first instance, the worker loses both his money and his work, and in the second, he loses his work. In both instances, the money's owner gets his capital and his interest. This is unfair to the worker, and it defrauds him. It is a venture that the revealed law does not affirm, and regarding which Malik said, this is not from the qirad of the Muslims. Right? This is not the mudarab of the Muslims.
So they have a very clear understanding, the scholars, regarding what this represents.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have the fifth justification, in which the Imam states that they say that bank transactions are sleeping partnerships, and sleeping partnerships are in accordance with what the partners agreed to and consent to, and it is not stipulated that the profit not be specified in advance. What is this whole sleeping partnership thing they're trying to refer to?
Yeah, so again, it's the same thing as the qirad and the mudaraba thing again. But what they're saying is they're saying it doesn't matter what it says in the fiqh books about it. It's like as long as the two partners agree.
Okay.
So if you and I go into a business and we agree that if there's a loss, you're protected, but I'll pay for it.
Right.
right? Or there's a profit, you'll get all of it and I'll get nothing.
Sure.
That's not valid.
Yeah.
That's not.
You can't come to agree upon something haram and say, well, it's not in the books of fiqh and we've agreed. I mean, an example of this would be, if your doctor agreed with you that he's going to end your life, that's still, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Even if you've agreed. So, no, I told him to kill me. No, don't do it.
Yeah.
Because it's still impermissible.
Exactly. So that's what he's getting at in this chapter, because they're going to say that it doesn't matter whatever the parties agree to and consent to, that's fine, and it's not stipulated, and so on and so forth. That doesn't matter.
Right. All right. Now, their sixth justification is some of them say that a banking transaction is the same as commissioning another to do something, wakala, meaning that the bank is the agent, wakil, of the money's owner and can invest it in what Allah has declared lawful, and he is satisfied with whatever comes back to him by way of profit. Okay, what exactly is at play in that one?
Yeah, so this one, la hawla wa quwwata illa billah, this is just and I actually saw a certain a quote-unquote imam in this country try to argue this point as well. And this is interesting, because remember, Imam at-Taaweel was writing this 20 years beforehand, or 20 years before the fact.
Very prescient, because this is before a lot of this has come to pass, because as just a little background, I first came to know about this whole thing with in the early 1990s, and it was a banking group from Kuwait, that was trying to insert this into the United States. That's when I first came to be aware of this. And me, I'm just thinking about, it's like, well, why are they trying to do this now? Right? Even in the 90s, I'm like, well, why are they trying to do this now? Don't they have their own structures in place? Why are they so diligent and steadfast on going into this? And you can see that there were scholars giving rulings against it and such. So it's not something that's just sudden. There's been a long-term statement of attack from scholars against this type of thinking.
Yeah. And I was saying, so someone in this country, a Hanafi, like he wrote some article not that long ago about how, like, when you get he actually said when you get a mortgage, it's wakala.
Right.
Well, really funny article, because the article starts off, and you can tell there's something wrong here, because the article starts off with this long spiel about how hard it is to rent in this country, and how difficult it is, and the burdens, and and Muslims really struggle. I was like, well, and then he wants to argue and say that it's so blatantly halal, because a mortgage is just like wakala. I think, well, if it's so blatantly halal, why are you starting off with this long spiel? It's like if fish is halal, you don't need to have a long spiel about how hungry you are.
Why is this happening? And you need to do something. And it's very strange, because some of the people that are vociferously making these arguments, it's like, have they ever rented?
Yeah.
Have they ever owned a house? Have they ever... you start wondering about them, because the arguments they're making, where do they live? Where do some of these people that are making these statements, it's so hard to live? It's like, listen, renting is actually easier than going through the process of buying a property and mortgage and signing the papers for 20 years and everything else. It's actually easier, and it's for this reason that most Germans do that.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a trend among a lot of the billionaires, especially the nouveau riche, they rent.
Yeah.
The only time they're buying properties is when they're like selling and dropping them, selling and dropping them. But most of them rent, unless they bought it when they were, way back when they were young, when they first got married. But most of these billionaires and wealthy people, they don't do that.
Yeah, because it's easier. The renting is easier, because if you need to pack up and move, you just pack up and move. Yeah. I even had this discussion again with my grandfather, who was the lawyer, because I once asked him about this. Because what do you think about buying a house and getting money to, because I was thinking, could I somehow get money, just make a down payment and buy a house outright? I was talking about this, and he said, don't do it, because the pitfalls involved. There's so many pitfalls involved, because once you buy the house and you own it, you're responsible for it. Yeah. Something goes wrong, pipes burst. There's so many things that go wrong, and then it's all on you. Yeah. You can't go to a landlord. You can't go to a accountant. No, it's
subsidence, especially issues like subsidence, drainage.
Yeah.
Distribution comes and gets on your case.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, listen, your house has this problem, that problem. It's like, no, that's none of my business.
Yeah, because they use that argument. They're going to say, well, if you're renting property from someone, that landlord can just kick you out any moment. Well, not really. Yeah. because there's a contract in place, and you do have certain rights under common law and the law of this country. You do. They just can't, like, right now is like, get out.
Yeah, it could take you up to a year.
Yeah.
For things to run their course through court.
Yeah.
And to go through, there may be tribunals involved and other stuff. Because I know a Muslim brother who's a landlord over several properties, and sometimes he's had to deal with tenants that default on their rent.
Yeah.
And he's like, it takes about a year to go through this whole thing.
Yeah.
And then finally you get the eviction notice, and then he's put out. And
Yeah.
then the sheriff comes, and all these other things. So it's not just saying the landlord just comes in and says, you got to be gone by tomorrow. And the tenant's like, oh, okay, we start putting my
that's how they try to that's how they try to present it. They try to present it that, oh, the landlord can just do this, and that's it. You and your wife and your kids are just on the street the next day, and like, no. And then you look at mortgages, and well, if you're getting a mortgage out and you fall behind in your mortgage payments, and the bank repossesses the house.
That's when you're really in danger, way more than renting.
Yeah.
Because they will roll in there, and they don't care about numbers, they don't care about people. They'll start putting prices on things and selling stuff. And there's plenty of very famous people that fell behind on these, $20 million homes, and the bank came in and just started writing prices on the appliances and things like this, and just literally held an auction while they were home.
Yeah.
It's brutal, some of the stuff that's done.
Yeah, so they try to make that comparison. Yeah, so the Wakalat chapter, that definitely addresses it. And I remember, just go back to this, the individual in this country, like because he tried to say, like, with a mortgage, because Imam at-Taaweel, he's talking more in general about, like, when you're putting your money in the bank, right? And then you're saying, like, oh, the bank's the wakil.
Yeah.
I was like, now how's the bank the wakil? The bank's making profit off this.
Yeah.
They're not.
And is putting your money in the bank. It's like because there's a surety that's assumed with that.
Yeah.
Is that money sure to just stay in your account where it is and not move around?
Yeah.
Or does that money actually move around? Does the bank actually use that money?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. So if someone opens a current account and they're like, all right, here's my £300 in the current account. Does that money move?
Yeah.
Is the bank using that?
Okay, that's the thing. Can you go back and claim it?
Yeah.
I think a good book on this topic, which I read a long time ago, I'll mention here, is from the Austrian School of Economics, Murray Rothbard. He wrote a book called "What Has Government Done to Our Money?"
Right.
And he goes into, like, fractional reserve banking and shows that, even before you get into certain transactions, it's a riba from the beginning. It's user from the beginning. So, because what a banknote is, and this is a bit of a side topic, but what a banknote is a receipt, in the sense that, so for example, if I put in, some gold in the bank, and you put in some gold in the bank, and I get, like, a 10-pound note to represent my gold,
Yes.
and you have a 10-pound note to represent my gold, but then the bank right away, they start trading with that gold or investing and moving it around, that money's no longer there.
Yeah.
Right? So if you and I go back at the same time to claim back our gold, it's not there.
Yeah.
Which means my piece of paper is worthless, your piece of paper is worthless.
And that's where runs on the bank come in at.
Yeah.
So then that's where these pronouncements come, where a lot of times on the teller window or at the beginning of the bank, they'll say, in the U.S. it's called the FDIC, maximum return, 100,000.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter how much you got in there.
Yeah.
During a serious trial, like a serious issue where there's an economic downturn, you might have 40 million in there, but the most you're getting back is 100,000.
Yeah, and that's why you have to also look at the situations like even if you're doing, say, online banking. If, let's say, you want to transfer money from one account to another, even if your own accounts, or transfer money to someone else, there's limits. Yeah. They're going to say there's certain limits per day that you can transfer. There's limits that you can take out from an ATM per day. Yeah. There's limits you can take out. Even if you want to travel somewhere, there are limits. Right.
This reminds me of something that happened to, he's a pastor in the United States. He got put in jail for the offense of structuring, which was this. He runs a small charity, and he was taking out $5,000 every week for the upkeep and running of the charity, travel, and everything else. And they arrested him for structuring because they said that it looked like by the amounts he was taking out every week, that he was structuring, in which he was trying to launder money or something like this. Yeah. To which you're like, well, wait a minute, hold on, that's my money.
Yeah, yeah.
How can you limit on how much I'm taking out with my money and things? So another thing that I think people sometimes forget is when you're dealing with a bank, the money's actually not secure.
Yeah.
Not as secure as people think it is. So
Yeah. Why people you might want to think about gold. Now, so back to this point about wakala. Imam Muhammad at-Taaweel's argument is slightly different from. Well, his argument is true. Obviously, that's the first thing. It's true. It's a true refutation. But someone in this country was trying to argue that getting a mortgage from a conventional bank, actually is wakala.
right.
And I think he flipped around and said, like you as a customer, you're the wakil, right? And you're dealing with the bank's money, and you're buying a house on behalf of the bank. I was like, what?
Which is assuming you have the same strength and powers of enforcement if the bank should come up short against you.
Yeah.
Which you don't. You have no recourse against.
But it's also the fact. Well, it's like if the bank, if you're the wakil on behalf of the bank, that means the bank would have to approach you first, right? And say, this is our money. We want you to take our money and go find a house and buy it. But no, you're going to the bank and saying, I want to buy
these 3 million kugrans for us.
I mean, come on. You'll get a more serious and valid email out of Nigeria. I mean, it doesn't make any. So my husband has died. He left $30 million behind. I need an account to put it in.
That's it. If you're able to pay the £700 release form, we're able to disperse half of the funds to you as a gratuitous greeting.
Yeah, silly stuff. Absolutely silly.
Okay, so we have their seventh justification. They say that if the ruler sees nothing wrong with the bank specifying the profits in advance, then there's no harm in it. I found that like the most galling. Because it's like, what on earth does the ruler have to do with, because now it's like putting authority in like fleshly rulers. Well,
yeah.
The rulers have decided it must be halal.
Yeah, that's why that chapter is actually very short. It's like a page because it doesn't require a lot of refutation. It's such an idiotic idea.
That's heavy. Now, this eighth justification, necessity, dorura, I really want you to unpack this, because I think people use this expression in the Anglosphere. It's one of those words. Certain words have gone into the Anglosphere Muslims lexicon, and the original sense and meaning of it's been lost.
Yeah.
Words like dalil, fatwa.
Yeah.
You know, it's certain words have they've become almost pop words, like pop culture words.
Yeah.
Like how you hear, chill or hip hop or bebop. Certain words have just gone into the popular lexicon, and their original meaning is now lost. And that's a whole strain of, I suppose, what you call like connotative linguistics. There's like a connotation that's been attached to it now.
Yeah.
And the original meaning is lost, like black. There's now connotative, linguistically speaking, connotatively, that means one thing.
Yeah.
But then the original use of that term, black, means to be bleached, it means white, it means this. Right? So some stuff has been lost. So if you could just unpack, first of all, starting with the linguistic connotation among Anglosphere Muslims of Durura, and then follow that up with the actual sense that the Imam gives of Durura and what that entails. Yeah.
So Durura and Hajja, so these are really, really important terms, and this is why I have a discussion at the end of the book with Imam Muhammad Zuhaili, where it actually deliberately goes into this. What are Durura and Hajja? Right? Because that really, really needs to be understood. Now, to give an example, because people out here in the West, in the Anglosphere, they use Durura to almost mean like any sort of difficulty, any sort of hardship, any sort of burden. But I think, no, the clearest example I've come across, I might have put it in a footnote. I think I might have put it in a footnote to Imam Muhammad Zuhaili's article. But I came across it in a Shafi fiqh book called Sharh al-Qult Nafis by Imam Muhammad al-Shatari. And this is not in the banking, but he discusses Durura and Hajja in the book of Talaq for a woman in her iddah.
Okay. Right.
So he says that a woman can leave her house. When one was in her iddah, she can leave her house for Hajja and Durura. So he says Hajja, it would be, for example, to go out and buy food, to go out and work, to earn money, right? Because if she doesn't do it, this leads to mashaqqa, it leads to difficulty, it leads to hardship, right? She's not going to have any food to eat, so forth. That's Hajja. Yeah, that's Hajja. Right. But then he says she can also leave the house for Durura. Durura is an intruder gets into the house catches fire, a wild animal gets in, right? A tiger appears in the living room, something like that. This is Durura.
Because it sounds to be, from what you're saying, that Durura is necessarily in relation to and connected to possible loss of life or
Yeah.
severe injury where a limb could be lost.
Exactly. So dorora, if you're thinking dorora in English, you think, well, that's an emergency situation,
Yeah.
right? Like if you have to leave your house catches fire, that's an emergency. That's not.
What do you call it in English? I think dire necessity or something.
Yeah,
Like
you might translate it to dire necessity, but really, that's an emergency.
Yeah.
That's the closest word I can think of in English is an emergency situation. Well, everything's a situation. That's modern parlance. It's an emergency. So going back to this point, if you're trying to say that I need to get a mortgage, people say I need to get a mortgage because it's a dorora. It's like, what? Are you going to die?
Yeah.
Are you going to lose a limb? Are you going to become severely ill? Are you going to get burnt?
Yeah. Will you be jailed for an undetermined period of time in which you cannot be released?
Yeah, it's just completely fraudulent argument. But people use these words like they just throw these words around, dorora and haja. I think also gets corrupted because I think in Urdu they say zarurat or something, and that means something else. Yeah. That kind of wacky stuff. But that's again, it's this issue of words enter the English language, and then they take on a totally different meaning, right? Like you mentioned before, the word fatwa, right? Like because of the whole Khomeini Salman Rushdie thing in the 80s, fatwa now means like to call a hit on someone. Yeah. Right, when it was to die.
Yeah, I've put a fatwa on his head.
Yeah, I mean, there was that YouTuber Paul Joseph Watson, like because he recently he saw that the Facebook put out some guidelines, and they said that it's perfectly permissible to on Facebook to issue threats of violence against certain undesirable people, and he was one of them.
Right.
So then he put out a video, and it said, Facebook just put a fatwa on me.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's what it becomes to me now in English. Yeah. Fatwa means to call a hit on someone.
Yeah. And it's like the people of Facebook, in general and whole, are not mujtahidun. They don't fulfill the prerequisites of ijtihad. They're not, they haven't memorized the necessary texts.
Yeah.
They don't have the conditions fulfilled. But it's like it's been lost.
Yeah.
That word in English has been divested.
Yeah.
Of its original meaning, and so another meaning's been poured in, and so this is where connotative linguistics comes in, and that's where misunderstandings happen a lot of times.
Yeah, so it's the same. It's the same thing here with the word dorora. Dorora has been corrupted, and it just seems to mean like because again, when it refers to Imam Muhammad Zuhayli's appendix, he talks about that. He says hajj has to do with mashaqqa, with hardship and difficulty.
That's appendix A.
Yeah, and then dorora has to do with actual like halak, like that's what you're worried about. There's going to be destruction and death and so forth. So how does this compare? How can you say that getting a mortgage is a dorora? It just does not fit at all. That no one's going to die from renting. No one's going to lose their life. No one's going to lose a limb. You're not going to get your hands chopped off or anything like that. It's a very, very obviously remarkably flimsy argument.
So then we come to the ninth justification. Following the school of Abu Hanifa in allowing usury in the abode of war al-Harb, based on the fatwa of the European Council, which has permitted Muslim minorities in Europe to buy homes by way of usurious bank loans.
Yeah.
Now, this issue of using Abu Hanifa, that's not really an issue in the United States.
Yeah.
And it's not an issue in Mexico or Canada or South America. A lot of it's the justifications before that are more of the issue, because those are mainly Arab communities. Yeah. And most of the Arab communities are not Hanafi. Yeah. And I like how he was really particular. He said following the school of Abu Hanifa and allowing users in the bank based on the Fatwa European Council, because he understands that the issue of using the Hanafi method and distorting it, this is a European issue. Yeah. Because many of the people that are based in Europe, especially Western Europe, are coming from a region in which the dominant method is that of Imam Abu Hanifa.
Especially in the UK, yeah.
So if you explain, sort of flesh out why this is significant and why that ninth justification is so hitting.
Yeah, and that's because just to say, I put that there, and I also added there's also Imam Muhammad al-Bolti's fatwa on the same thing, which is I think is Appendix B.
Yes, Appendix number B.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and he ties it into Morocco because people try to tie that into Morocco. So yeah, the European Fatwa Council, certain Hanafis, I think. So I did sit down with Asrar Rashid, and he tried to explain the Hanafi ruling to me different. I think some of their terminology is different. Sure. But it goes like this. It goes down to the fact that Dar al-Harb, again, this is why I also have the appendix about abodes of the earth,
Yeah.
right? So the Shafi understanding, and I think that's the Maliki understanding as well, because Imam Muhammad is a Maliki, is also the same for the Hanbalis, is that Dar al-Harb is a subset of Dar al-Kufr.
Yeah.
Dar al-Kufr is where the unbelievers rule, and then Dar al-Harb is that subset within Dar al-Kufr where Muslims are actually being persecuted, and they're not being allowed to manifest their faith, they're being pushed out, they're being suppressed.
And it may be an instance in which there's actually all-out war happening, where there's
Yeah,
not need for
exactly.
position.
Yeah.
So it's like it's not Dar al-Islam yet because the Muslims aren't dominant with their laws, and it's not Dar al-Kufr yet because the Kuffar aren't dominant with their laws. So there's this struggle that's happening.
Yeah. So in that case, it was like, and what Imam al-Bulti also explains, we put the two Maraja and their rulings together, is that if you're in a wartime situation, you're actually in active combat, property is constantly changing hands anyway,
Yeah.
right?
You're not thinking about, I need to get some real estate.
Yeah,
You're trying
exactly.
to survive, bread, water, your basic amenities.
Yeah, so you have a battle. Again, you have a battle, and the sort of spoils of war, and you take their property, you lose a battle, they take your property, and this kind of thing. Right? All this, property is constantly changing hands in a war. So what does that have to do with living in Europe, where you actually do have peace, you have security, the government lets you, you have your messages, you have your schools, you have all these sort of things. How are you in a war zone?
Yeah.
How are you being persecuted? And then this argument completely falls apart. And that's why Imam al-Bulti in his fatwa, he says this is just an abuse of Imam Abu Hanifa. It's an abuse of his madhab.
Yeah, because Muhammad Fuad al-Barazi was asked about this. He was asked on a number of occasions. Once we were in a class with him, and then he was asked again, and he wrote it down. He had a fatwa written down. He's like, these people have distorted my method. They lie. And he was in South America at the time.
Yeah.
I think it was in, where was he? Was it in Brazil? I think it was in Brazil, and he's like, they lie.
Yeah.
And he had the fatwa written down, and then he had tawqi' done on it. He's like, no, they lie. Because it was that serious of an issue that they distorted their school.
Yeah, and what Imam Muhammad at-Taaweel goes into is he actually tries to show that even amongst the Hanafi madhab, because he's a Maliki, he says we wouldn't accept it because it's weak for certain reasons. He says that the hadith is based on his mursal, you can't use it as proof, and he says that, and this is again on page 81, 82, he says chain of transmission has unknown narrators. This is why Imam Shafi said, and then Milal Mercium said that it's not possibly established. Then he calls Imam Muwafid ibn Qudama and the Mughni. It's an unknown report. It's not found in any authentic collection, any Musnad collection, and so on and so forth. So he actually attacks in more depth than what Imam Muhammad al-Bulti did.
And from what I've seen, and I don't know because when we talk about Mu'tamid, I know for the Malikis, the Hanbalis, and the Shafi'is, we have a pretty sort of a cement understanding of Mu'tamid.
Yeah.
But I don't think the Hanafis do, from Hanafis I've spoken, their understanding of Mu'tamid, I suppose, would classify as like Zahir in our madhabs. But from what I'm able to gather, this statement being put forward by people that claim the Hanafi school, this isn't the dominant statement in the Hanafi school.
Yeah.
And it's not even the Zahir ruling in the Hanafi school from what people have explained and what they've told me. So why they've gone and reached out and grabbed onto something that's not the dominant hold, it also shows the desperation that these people have.
Yeah, just trying to grab onto anything that would back up their position.
His 10th justification that he lists is the claims that interest-bearing loans remove difficulties for Muslims and make their transactions easier for them. And that's very, it's like, again, the word that came into English parlance, maslaha. That we need to facilitate things. We need to give Muslims ease. Yeah. And this gives them tremendous ease. Talk about that a little bit.
Okay, so this is a deeper issue, and this is why, inshallah. Now, you and I are always talking about translation projects. One translation project that is in the pipeline for me, I would like to study some more usul al-fiqh, is Imam Muhammad al-Bulti's book, Dawabit al-Maslaha. Right. The principles and the regulations regarding maslaha. And this is something that Imam Muhammad talks about in this book. He also talks about it in La Dukuriyat al-Fiqh, Islamic Law is Not Misogynistic, which I hope to release soon. Is that when we talk about maslaha as Muslims, maslaha is not a purely a dunyawi thing. It's not just, we're not looking at here in the world.
And there are clear, it's like, sorry to interrupt, but it's like maslaha, if you look at what Tufi and others have said, because I would say that Hanbali school probably relies on this principle more than the other schools, most likely. Tufi and others talk about maslaha is, for the simplest and most crude definition, when there are specific texts of the revealed law in which falling back on the mutlaq or the am ayat is more beneficial for a situation based upon certain conditions. Because normally the muqayyid limits the am, but there's certain instances where we actually might limit the muqayyid with the am, right? That for lack of a better understanding, because of certain conditions in place, and those conditions are governed by undergirding principles.
Yeah.
But again, it gets divested of its meaning, gets jerked out of its actual context, slips into English like hip hop vocabulary, and it just gets used.
Yeah, so maslaha, again, and then, exactly, so maslaha, what happens is that, what all these imams explain is that maslaha is an ukhrawi benefit. Yeah. It has to benefit you in your hereafter. And like what Imam Muhammad at-Taaweel gets into, he says, if it's going to benefit you in your hereafter, that means you're going to be obeying Allah. Yeah. Right? Whatever this maslaha is, you want to be obeying Allah because that's going to benefit you in this life and in the next. Right. It's not a maslaha if it's ma'asiyah. If it's disobedience to Allah, it's not a maslaha. That doesn't fit. But what they try to do is they try to put it within that dunyawi framework and say, well, you're getting some benefit out of it. Yeah. So because a mortgage is allowing you to
get on the property ladder.
Yeah, get on the property ladder and
live in a nice neighborhood.
Right, and then you can send your kids to a nice school and all that stuff. Therefore, it's clearly a maslaha. And that's like no, that's not always how it works. Yeah. I mean, a common example I think of how maslaha would work and how a maraja might give an opinion based on maslaha. Like for example, like if in the book al-Fiqh al-Minhaji by Sheikh Mustafa al-Bagha and his other co-authors Ali Sharbaji, I forget the name of the other one now. Not Muhyiddin Mistu. The name will come to me, inshallah. But for example, again, we have another maraja here writing a fiqh book based on Mughni al-Muhtaj by Imam Khatib al-Shirbini. Now, they mention a position in there, for example, with zakat. If you're going to pay zakat al-fitr, they say, okay, if you want to, you can pay in cash. Okay. Right? You can pay in money. Banknotes. Right? You can, whatever it is, coins or whatever it is. Sure. Right? Even though the Mu'tamad position of the Shafi'i madhab is that you pay in food. Right, you're going to pay within the staple crop, pay from the staple crop of the country, whether it's rice or wheat or whatever it is. Sure. But that's an example of where a maraja is saying, okay, because there's a maslaha there, as someone on the street, they might find it more beneficial to have some money in their hand as opposed to a bag of rice or a bag of wheat.
Tufi's example, and I think this is significant. The example he gives around 11 principles of it. He says one of the examples of where maslaha was used, and it's the hadith in al-Bukhari, where the Prophet ﷺ said, were your people not so close to the Jahiliyyah age still, I would have demolished the Kaaba all the way back down to the foundations of Ibrahim and rebuilt it. Now, the actual hukam is that it should be. Because even from the rebuilding, it was still in a state of slight dilapidation. Yeah. But the am is not to do it, because the people are still new Muslims, and their veneration for the Kaaba is such that even though it's something that needs to be done, they might cause hassle with it. Yeah. So it's falling back on that understanding that, okay, we're not going to do this. Yeah. Right. And then when the opportunity did present itself, Abdullah ibn Zubayr is the one who did the renovations. Yeah. He wasn't able to finish it because the Bani Umayyah that killed him and then had to be updated and everything else. But it's like there's principles behind this issue of maslaha, but it's being buried and subsumed and washed out in this sort of hip hoppy pop way.
And you can't. And the other thing is you can't use this argument of maslaha and mafsada when there's a clear text, right? And this is one of the things he brings up is he talks about the Imam. He says, Allah does this in the Quran. For example, if you read in Surah Al-Baqarah, ayahs 216 to 219, right? I mean, that's a whole page. Off the top of the page where Allah talks about fighting, and He says, Allah says that you might despise something, but it's good for you, right? You might love something, but it's bad for you, right? Allah knows, wallahu a'lam, wallahu ya'lam wa antum la ta'lamun. But then the bottom of the page, he actually talks about, is it khamr or gambling?
Yes. Khamr and maisir. And that there's benefit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's benefit in both of them, but the itham is greater,
Yes.
right? So right there is an example where Allah is acknowledging, saying, yeah, there's something beneficial in this,
Yeah.
but it's haram.
Yeah.
So you can't override that. The fact that something being beneficial or advantageous does not override the ruling. It simply does not work like that.
Yeah, and the benefit, the scholars of tafsir mention, is that the nefa is for what people are getting out of it. It's not like the akhirah things. No, the nefa is what the people are getting out of it.
Which is dunyui benefit.
That's it. Now, the 11th justification is to cling to the outward purport of the Exalted's statement. You who believe, do not feed on usury multiplied and then remultiplied. I read that a couple of times and thought, why would someone do that? What? I mean, it's like they're saying, listen, I'm not doing riba multiplied and then multiplied again.
Yeah.
I'm just doing it once.
Yeah, I'm just doing riba once. Yeah.
Where does that thinking come from? And what was the Imam's response in dealing with this? I mean, it's just not only specious, but it's dumbfounding almost. You're just left and why would someone say this?
So I'm as stumped as you. But what the Imam does, obviously, if one reads the chapter, is that he talks about, he brings in the other hadith, the other evidences where it's just usury. Allah is just talking about riba, or the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is talking about riba, right? Where muda'af is not mentioned. The fact that it's multiplied, remultiplied, that's not mentioned. There's other hadith and ayat which is like riba. Just riba is mentioned as haram.
Just riba. Yeah.
Because again, this is an example. People are not reading the Quran from cover to cover. They're just doing pick and mix. And like, oh, I like this ayah. I'll stick with this.
That's it. So what's happened is they've already made their mind up.
Yeah.
Now they're looking for some ayah that seems to undergird their understanding.
Yeah.
All right. So we now have the 12th and final justification, which is to say that taking out a mortgage to buy a home has an undoubted benefit for the borrower, embodied in the ownership of a home in the end, and in that he is exempt from taxes for the duration of the loan.
Yeah.
Now, if you could sort of unpack this, but also because there's an assumption here that when you're listening to that, understanding that the person that's making that claim is speaking as if the mortgage, like it's people always complete the mortgage.
Yeah.
That it's safe, that it's not fluid, that it's this solid thing that everyone that takes out one always completes. If you could sort of unpack this a little bit and flesh out some of the points that the Imam is making.
Yeah. So I think one thing that really stands out here is again, and this is what I just mentioned before about benefit.
Yes.
Right. So he quotes again Surah Al-Baqarah 2:19. They'll ask you about alcoholic drinks and gambling. Say there's great wrong in both of them, and also certain benefits for mankind, but the wrong in them is greater than the benefit. So that's the first thing, that Allah in the Quran is acknowledging that something's beneficial, but that doesn't override the rule. It doesn't justify the thing itself.
Doesn't take anything away.
If it's haram, it's haram.
Yeah, pork might be called the number one white meat tomorrow, but that doesn't take away, it's still haram.
Yeah, and then another example here: the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam prohibited the price for a dog, right? And no one denies the numerous benefits of dogs.
Yeah,
that's in the Shafi method. We're even stricter. It's like the dog is najis. You can't even own it technically. We call it ikhtisas.
Right.
It's like exclusively. What would you translate as ikhtisas? It's exclusively yours in the sense that it's under your charge or something.
Its services are being used by you, so it's under your charge.
Yeah, but it's not milk.
Yeah,
it's ikhtisas. It's not milk.
Under your charge.
So that what he's going into here, this idea that just because there's a benefit, there's a presumed benefit that you're going to own a home in the end, and that you're exempt from taxes. I mean, this might be something to do with Moroccan law. I don't know about this. You don't have to pay any taxes while you're actually paying off the loan. But he does go into this is like a long discussion of the book. So for example, like number 2, he says, these people can forget or ignore the fact that every interest-bearing loan has an undoubted benefit for the borrower. There's no difference between the one who borrows in order to buy a home and the one who orders in order to feed his dependents. This requires that interest-bearing loans be permissible for everyone. And thus there will no longer be any form of a loan with unlawful interest, and there will no longer be any place for the hadith to prohibit usury in loans as long as there's the undoubted benefit that allows it. This is false, and what leads to it by way of allowing interest-bearing loans is also false. So if you go into this idea that, well, we can overturn the ruling because there's a benefit, you can overturn a lot of things.
Yeah.
You can just overturn just about anything.
Adultery.
Right? I mean, you're opening the floodgates.
You could say,
We
okay,
don't have a law anymore.
Yeah, because you're like, okay, well, I'm overturning the law regarding adultery because my wife doesn't love me anymore, so I'm going to go with this other woman.
Yeah, and people have that. I mean, because you're talking about adultery. I mean, there are organizations in this country, in the United Kingdom. There are organizations in the United Kingdom where married people who are in loveless marriages or marriages where the husband or the wife has said, I'm not going to do this anymore. Yeah. I'm not going to sleep with you anymore. Right? So there are organizations that have a service where a married man and a married woman can meet through this website and say, yeah, I'm in this situation. My husband no longer sleeps with me. I'm in this situation. My wife no longer sleeps with me. So why don't we sleep together? And then they get together. They meet on weekends, and they have an adulterous relationship. And they say, well, it's beneficial because, we're not committed to each other. And it means at the same time, we stay with our husbands. We stay with our wives. We're maintaining our loyalty. They don't know about it. And that's a good
out of sight, out of mind.
Right? And they justify it. They'll probably justify it. They say, listen, instead of leaving my wife and breaking my family, I've just got a little bit on the side, and that's fine. No one needs to know about it. I'm not hurting anybody.
Yeah. This is just, but that's that same walk we're taking by going down that road when we talk about, nullifying the revealed law. It's that same road we're walking down. Now, what I would like, having gone through these 12 justifications, could you just sort of flesh out then an overall summary, what the listener and the potential reader, what they should be able to take away from this book, what they're going to take away from the book? Because I noticed the cover of the book this is the Bank of England.
Yeah.
So it's like, all right, what exactly? We've seen the numerous benefits that the Imam has mentioned in addressing these contentions.
Yeah.
That people taking out these loans have brought forth. So now, what are some of the added benefits that a reader of this book, a potential buyer, that the listeners will be able to take away?
Okay. Well, I would say, because you mentioned the cover, I think the cover was chosen because to show that, listen, it's the exact same thing. It doesn't matter how much you dress it up and you use all the hocus pocus language and you call it Sharia compliant. No. Pull away the facade, it's the exact same system.
Right.
It comes from the exact same source. The riba that these banks are doing is the same kind of riba that you're going to find in the Bank of England or the Federal Reserve or whatever. It's the exact same thing. You're buying the system. And that's why I've chosen that bit for the blurb, right. Which is actually the conclusion of the book.
Okay.
Where he says, any fatwa allowing bank interest, whether taking it or giving it, is an invalid juridical opinion, an affront to the Islamic revealed law, and a slander against it, if not an objection and outright opposition to it. And likewise, it is an immense service to usurious banks, a priceless gift that they have waited for and yearned for a very long time. Meaning, that's why I'm saying, if you're any Muslim giving a fatwa in favor of this stuff is in service of these people on the cover.
Yeah.
That's basically what you're doing. So he says, on the one hand, it destroys the religious barrier that Islam had placed between the Muslims and the usurious banks, protecting them from their greed and exploitation and from their economies and destinies being controlled. On the other hand, it mobilizes and conscripts the Ummah to serve imperialistic capital by providing its banks with sufficient monetary liquidity so that they can expand their activities, secure their influence, and consolidate their monopoly, after which they can acquire further fixed benefits. This is how they eat the profits of those who save. Which again is a common problem with fractional reserve banking with inflation, right? So if you're saving money, it's losing value. Yeah. And exhaust the efforts of those who invest and borrow, and they appropriate Muslims' wealth because of fatwas given by Muslims. Right. So putting all this together, and I think again, something I wanted to mention at the beginning because you pointed out. Imam al-Bolti has a fatwa, which is on the Georgese blog right now. I think it's in the Sima Sham website being updated. Fatwa that served the West.
Yes.
Right, which is from his book, Al-Islam al-Gharb.
I think that's, I put that in the title, Spokesmen for Islam in the West are frauds.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what it is. So when we actually get back to what the Maraja have said on these issues, then you start realizing, wait a second, all these people out here in the Anglosphere, these fake fatwa councils and so forth, who are telling you Oh yeah, you can do this. Oh yeah, this is halal. This is lawful. This is Sharia compliant. Go ahead and do it. And then they're just handing you over and making you a slave of these banks and these other institutions. This is what you need to realize, that these people are lying to you. They're frauds. They do not have the authority to speak on these issues.
You know, the ruthless thing about this is if you have a valid mujtahid who makes an ijtihad and you rely on him, if he's mistaken, then he has one reward for his ijtihad. And if he is correct, he has two.
Yeah.
Hadith of Muslim. And that his ijtihad, he bears the responsibility for you if it should be the case that he's mistaken.
Yeah.
These people doing what they're doing are not valid mujtahids.
Exactly.
So when they fall foul of the revealed law, you can't lean on them on the day of resurrection.
Yeah.
It's all back on you. And so when these people will say, well, I wasn't qualified, I was following scholarship, they're going to be told, no, you weren't. These people aren't qualified. So now it's like back on you again twice.
Yeah.
In this life and the akhirah. And that it's just you can't think of a plan more diabolical to use against people than not only leading them astray in this issue, but then also the recourse where they would have access to the mercy of Allah if they happen to be mistaken or they were following a mistaken ruling. You take that safeguard away.
Yeah.
So they not only are exposed to punishment in this life, you expose it to them again in the hereafter.
Yeah.
So I wanted to say thank you to our brother Mehdi Lak, alhamdulillah, for providing such a very thorough review of this book, and I eagerly await to see the response to this book. I hope that it becomes very well known. I hope it winds up going on, one of Amazon's bestsellers list, because it's a small text, but it's pregnant with meanings. I think anyone that's thought about this issue, no matter where they are right now, even if they've already said, well, listen, alhamdulillah, I already know the rulings on the matter, I know it's not right, they should still have it on their bookshelf. Because you meet different people. You run across people. There's people that have different understandings. And to just have that on your shelf, I think that it's an indispensable resource to have. So, inshallah, before we close out, if you could just mention what upcoming projects and other things you have going.
Yeah, so upcoming projects, I did mention some of these in the last podcast we did, but yeah, I have one more book by Muhammad at-Taaweel I want to get out this year. The next one in the series, La Dhukuriyya fil Fiqh, Islamic Laws Not Misogynistic. That's the title I've chosen in English. I mean, the literal translation of the title would be there's no masculinism in fiqh. Like Dhukuriyya is as the opposite of feminism, right? So saying like Islamic law is not feminist, it's not masculinist, so to speak. Fiqh is just fiqh. So that's coming out soon, inshallah.
So that's going to be inflammatory, you think?
Yes.
Yeah.
That would be quite inflammatory because, again, Imam Muhammad at-Taaweel, I mean, you can see even his writing style. He just puts his points across, shows you the usuli principles, shows you the fiqh principles. Is very, very quite blunt and to the point. But again, what I've done again is I've supplemented with other appendices. This time again, Imam al-Bulti again. There will be appendix going into the topic of women and intellect because people have issues about this. Yeah. There's also some fatwa on khula and how a woman can end a marriage depending on the situation she's in. Then there's also Imam al-Nawawi's discussion on women being the masjid from Sahih Muslim, Bisharh al-Nawawi. Followed by fatwa Imam al-Halim Mahmoud, the great Marja of Egypt, the Sheikh al-Azhar from about 40 years ago. And then another fatwa by him, Imam al-Halim Mahmoud, which would be the last appendix on can women be awliya of Allah? Which again is another issue that people forget about. There are reasons why women don't just memorize the Quran for like no reason. People go, why do they memorize the Quran? They're going to be imams. And people ask these silly questions. Like, no, they're drawing closer to Allah just like you should be. Then I've got another book called The Wonders of Waqf, which is it's a translation of appendix that I had in another book I did on Waqf 5 years ago, which is from the Mughni al-Muhtaj by al-Khatib al-Shirbini. That's a long book because it's got the chapter from Mughni al-Muhtaj. It's got appendices by Imam al-Bolti, appendices by Shaykh Muslim al-Bagha. But then a large part of the appendix was a discussion on examples of waqf from the book Min Wara'i Hadaratina, from the wonders of our civilization by Dr. Mustafa Sibai, a Syrian writer from I think in the Christian calendar, we're looking at the 1970s, I think.
He was also the head of the Dar al-Hadith. He was also the head of that.
Really?
He was teaching there like a visiting rector.
Oh, okay.
With some hadith knowledge as well.
Okay, mashallah, yeah. So that book. So what he does in that book. So I'm just going over the proof copy right now. Is he just goes examples of the stuff that the Muslims built. Sorry, in terms of like schools, hospitals, masjids, and just other awqaf type organizations that Muslims set up for the benefit of other believers. Whether it was places for what are some examples I just reading yesterday? You'd have like one in Damascus called like a Zabadi waqf. A Zabadi waqf is like the plate that you carry your yogurt in. Yeah. So if a kid goes out to buy yogurt for his family, like his parents send him out to buy yogurt, and he's on his way home, and let's say he breaks it, like he drops it, he breaks it. He's like, what am I going to do? He goes to this waqf. They'll give him a new one, and he goes home, and no one's the wiser. No one knows about it. Little simple things like this. Yeah. Little simple things like this. And so you get from that all the way to these great hospitals that were built, these great schools that were built, the Nidhamiyya or the various schools of fiqh that were built in Damascus. So that's a short book, maybe about half the size of this even. And that will be available, inshallah, the next week or so. And that will be an exciting read. Because again, what I'm trying to do with that book is I'm trying to, on the one hand, you could say to inspire people to think about waqf again, and that's why I've put in there'll be an introduction by Imam Mustafa al-Bagha taken from al-Fiqh al-Manhaji, which is also in the original waqf book, where he discusses how Muslims seem to have fallen away from waqf, and waqf really is a sign of your belief in the akhirah.
Sign of autonomy as well, because you're moving above dependence on government and things like that.
And that's what I'm getting at. So in the introduction, if someone reads the introduction to that book, what they're going to see is we're looking at a situation, especially out here in the Anglosphere, where because I started my waqf book first in 2014 when people were talking about austerity measures. Governments are out of money. Governments are running out of money, and it's true. Governments, people have to realize it doesn't matter what the situation is. Governments do not have a bottomless pit of money, right? They run out of money. They can't pay their bills. Stuff gets cut, right? And health services get cut. Education gets cut, and so on and so forth.
Transportation.
And Imam Ghazali in his Kitab al-Halal al-Haram, which again I'm going to republish soon, because the waqf book was written as a follow-up to Kitab al-Halal al-Haram, because Imam Ghazali actually goes into detail in that section about the sources, like where do governments get their money. He discusses this. Is it going to be from foreign invasions? Is it going to be from taxation? And so on and so on. There's all kinds of sources, but it's all finite. So moving forward, the waqf is a brilliant example of how Muslims are providing services for free, especially education and health, for free within the private sector. Yeah. The government's not paying for it. And there's even a guy, he's not Muslim, Benedict Kohler.
So we're not big government people then?
We're not big government people. We're not looking to the state to provide everything. It's within the private sector.
Because if that state or that empire collapses, then whatever you've built through it goes as well.
Exactly. So Benedict Kohler, who's a German researcher, he wrote a book called Early Islam, The Birth of Capitalism. He did a presentation on his book, and he talked about awqaf, and he said that, you see, the brilliant thing here is it's about local autonomy. So instead of everyone paying taxes and then that money gets sent off to some faraway capital, whether it's London or Washington D.C. or whatever it is, and it's a select group of people over there, and they're going to decide where that money goes. They're going to say we're putting this many millions towards education and healthcare and Medicaid and whatever it is. He says no, you've got people at the local level. So it doesn't matter where you are, whether you're in Nottingham or you're in Maryland or whatever it is, and you're saying, okay, my community needs a school, my community needs a clinic, my community needs maybe they need a university or a kutab, whatever it is, kutab. That person will put their own money forward and set it up and have other awqaf pouring into it, and it's a localism just in action and in force. It has nothing to do with the government, and people are getting treated, they're getting serviced for free. and all that money's coming in. It's all from the private sector, and whoever sets it up, that's their sadaqah jariyah, that's their permanent sadaqah, and they're getting rewarded for it constantly in the afterlife. So this is something we need to think about, and it's to motivate people, and also to give Muslims some sort of some pride again, some izzah.
Yeah.
Because again, Muslims again, this day and age, we have such an inferiority complex where we think, oh, we never did anything, our civilization's gone, and look what the Americans have, and look what the British have, and this is, we're not looking properly at our own history. We're just sort of dismissing it and feeling like feeling ashamed of it, and feeling like Islam is now, it went from the days of grandeur, now it's just like some pungent body odor that you need to hide, not show anyone and apologize for all the time. Like, no, we have a great history and we need to be reminded of that. So inshallah, when that book comes out, hopefully we do another podcast and talk about things, and I want to hear more I'd like to hear more examples from you, because you've told me lots of examples about the 80 hospitals in Baghdad and so many things that Muslims built, and we really need to start talking about this again, and have some pride in our background and our history.
Okay, so alhamdulillah, this has been a really informative and very animated podcast. Alhamdulillah, I think the listeners and all of us have benefited a great deal. So inshallah, if you close us out with some final words and it's ending, inshallah, we'd be appreciative of that. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I think that's everything from my side. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Walhamdulillah rabbil alamin. Wa salatu wassalam ala rasulillah.